in the government shutdown, now on day 38. Beginning today, the Federal Aviation Administration is ordering airlines to cut their flights by 4% at America's busiest airports. The four biggest airlines, American, Delta, United, and Southwest, estimate this will amount to roughly 700 flights not going out today. The FAA says the flight cancellations will only go up from here, increasing to 10% of all flights by next Friday. The Department of Transportation says the purpose of these reductions is to alleviate burnout on air traffic controllers. These federal workers have dealt with staffing shortages since the shutdown began, and those on the job are not getting paid. NBC News senior national political reporter, Sahil Kapoor, is on Capitol Hill, and NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson is at Houston's George Bush Airport. Sahil, I'll start with you because we have that breaking news about the shutdown. Senate Democrats just put an offer on the table to try to end the impasse. What can you tell us?
Yeah, that's right, Kate. We are seeing a new offer from Senate Democrats being proposed on the floor of the chamber to Republicans as a way to reopen this government after this record-long shutdown. The offer was officially made on the floor by the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer. Let me just tell you what it includes. What the Democrats are offering is a clean continuing resolution to reopen the government along the lines of what Republicans want. In addition to that, a bipartisan minibus of appropriations bills, in other words, full-year funding bills for specific agencies that have been negotiated on a bipartisan basis. And here's where it gets interesting. A one-year extension of ACA funding that is expiring at the end of this year and threatening massive premium hikes for 2026. This has been the biggest sticking point in the shutdown so far. What Democrats are saying is that they're offering a simple one-year extension of current law that, in their view, should be consistent with the Republican idea that they can't negotiate on healthcare funding. They say do a one-year extension and set up a bipartisan committee to negotiate a broader deal on healthcare. Take a listen to what Senator Schumer said about this on the floor.
And since what we're proposing is only a simple extension of current law, the Senate could do this within a few hours. This is a reasonable offer that reopens the government, deals with health care affordability, and begins a process of negotiating reforms to the ACA tax credits for the future.
And speaking just after Schumer was Gary Peters, the Michigan Democrat. I'm told by two sources that this was his idea, that he shopped it to Democrats ahead of time before this was made. Will Republicans agree to this? TBD. But it's certainly far from what Republicans had wanted to reopen the government, Kate.
Yeah, well, it's at least something on a Friday to talk about. Sahil, thank you. Priscilla, let me bring you in. What are passengers telling you about their experiences at the airport? I know some people are finding out ahead of their flights that they're canceled.
Yeah, Kate, and I think that has been a key here. We know that Delta and United have both already notified passengers through Sunday if their flights are canceled. And in fact, United's director of operations told my colleague Maggie Vespa that 80% of customers knew yesterday if their flights were going to be impacted today. And so that may have something to do with what we're seeing on the ground here in Houston, which is TSA lines appear to be moving. All of the passengers we've spoken to say that their flights are on track to go out on time, but that doesn't change the fact that they came to the airport today with a lot of stress and anxiety around what exactly they were going to be faced with walking in. I want to play some of what I've heard from passengers. Were you worried that your flight was going to be canceled?
Oh yeah, my dad was sending me texts, my mom was sending me texts, I had like 5 people text me like, are you going to make it? Are you going to make it?
It looks a lot more clear than I expected. So pleasantly surprised. Been a long week.
Yeah.
So ready to get back to Detroit.
But of course, the other thing that folks are going to have to worry about is that today that reduction is 4%, but that is going to go up throughout the next week and reach 10% by next Friday. And in fact, Secretary Duffy is now saying that it could go as high as 20%, and that is when it is going to become very difficult to manage these cancellations and just put those passengers on different flights, is what the airlines are saying. Kate?
Yeah, Priscilla Thompson, Sahil Kapoor, thank you both. Appreciate it. Let's talk more about these air travel issues with Clint Henderson. He's the managing editor at The Points Guy. Clint, good to see you. Lots of uncertainty right now surrounding air travel. You just heard Priscilla say that maybe 20% eventually of flights might get canceled. How should people prepare if they've got travel coming up, if they're flying at Thanksgiving? What do they do?
You know, I always give this advice, but it's now more important than ever. You have got to be an educated consumer. You need to have the airline app installed on your phone. You need to know the customer service phone number to the airlines. You need to be tracking what's going on at your departure airport and your arrival airport. You know, you can't go to the FAA sites that usually monitor that stuff. You have to go to the individual airport just to see what's going on. And then, you know, don't sleep on social media. Make sure that you follow the airline you're going to be flying so you can direct message them on social media if you need to. And also pay attention to what you're seeing on TikTok, on Instagram. That's where we first heard about those insane lines at Houston for TSA lines of like 5 to 6 hours. So you really need to be aware, and then have a plan B. You've got to have a backup plan. I think a lot of the flights that are going to be canceled are the smaller regional flights. So if you can get closer to your final destination, and say you're going to Salt Lake City and then on to somewhere in Montana, get to that hub in Salt Lake City, have a rental car booked as a backup in case you can't get to that final destination.
Clint, if people are lucky enough to have like credit card points, they might use those or miles on airlines to book flights or through third-party websites as opposed to right to the airline itself. I wonder what kind of recourse do they have if their flight gets canceled?
Yeah, so it's a little harder when you add a third-party booking site into the mix. We saw this a lot during COVID, where it just became hard. That's why we tell people you should probably just book direct. I will say, if you've got a stash of points and miles, not a bad idea to book a backup flight on a different airline using those points. So if you're flying United, maybe book an American flight as a backup using points. Just in case something goes wrong with that United flight. You can't book both, so you can't book a mileage and a cash flight on United, for example, right, because they'll cancel those tickets.
Yeah, and the point there is that you can, if you don't need to take that flight that you booked with points, you can pull it back. You can get those points
That's
back
exactly right,
and not lose anything. Right. What kinds of rights do flyers have when it comes to these disrupted flights?
So the good news is the same rights that apply that are already fairly strong, the Biden administration put into place. You're owed an immediate refund or a timely refund if your flight is canceled by the airline. If there's substantial delays, you can decide to give up on the trip and get a refund at that point as well. So don't forget about that. And then the third thing I would say is the airlines are being very flexible right now because of this tenuous situation. And so usually they'll work with you to rebook you a later flight. If you see a situation developing like at Houston where we saw 5-hour lines, don't go to the airport. Don't even bother trying to travel that day. Just book another flight for a different day, and the airlines will work with you on that front.
All right, Clint Henderson, thank you so much. Well, there is a new report on the number of layoffs happening across the U.S. According to the research firm Challenger, Gray & Christmas, U.S.-based companies announced more than 153,000 job cuts in October. That is the highest total for any October in more than 20 years. This comes as we were supposed to get another jobs report today, but because of the government shutdown, experts and organizations kind of have to piece together other reports on the job market because we don't have that government data. Joining us now is NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung. Brian, walk us through what we do know and what's likely contributing to that surge that was found in job cuts.
Yeah, King, we were supposed to get the gold standard of data on the jobs market from the government, but with the government shutdown, we're not getting it. But other indicators show us that this jobs market is weakening a little bit. The closest thing that we have comes from ADP. This is the company that processes, in some cases, your paychecks. And they noticed that the number of jobs added per month have been much slower than they were in the beginning of this year when we were getting over 100,000 per month, really, except for the month of July. We've actually seen much more weakness in terms of the pace of job growth. In fact, in some months, even job contractions. When we talk about the job cuts, though, this has been getting a lot of attention. Companies like Amazon, as well as Target, making big cuts in the thousands. Again, this is announced job cuts. This comes from that Challenger report that you were mentioning. There's a lot of caveats to this, like, for example, the companies might not follow through on those layoffs. It might cover jobs that are in other countries, even if we're talking about U.S.-based employers. But nonetheless, you can see that spike in this month. And on the whole, for 2025, it's the highest number that we've seen since 2020. All of this coinciding with overall malaise about this economy. This is consumer sentiment, a number we just got this morning. These are some of the lowest levels the University of Michigan has ever recorded in terms of feelings about the overall economy. You can imagine with concerns about the job market, that might explain that decline.
Yeah, for sure. And we have some new data on how many federal workers are filing for unemployment benefits. What do we know?
Yeah, well, this is economic sentiment among overall, people in this economy. But when you talk about federal workers, they're probably feeling even worse because they're having to go to work on furlough without paychecks coming in. Here are the stats that we have. Again, the Department of Labor is closed, so we're not getting federal data on this, but states are reporting this on an individual basis. And from what we can gather, this is over almost 8,000 in terms of new federal workers now filing for unemployment insurance. That is far above the normal level that we saw prior to the government shutdown, which was only about 600 per week. You can see how many thousands of people are being impacted by the shutdown.
Yeah. All right, Brian Chung, thank you.